Doctors of Reddit, what's something someone came to the hospital for that they thought wasn't a big deal but turned out to be much worse? When I was doing my hospital placements, a patient came in laughing and skipping for their scan. They thought 100% they were in remission and clear of cancer growth. I was spending a day with the scan techs and sat in. The scan didn't show one tumor. It showed hundreds. The guy was riddled with metastases. It was terminal. He had months. He was laughing and smiling with us. He asked if we could tell him how it went. And the tech said we couldn't. It was for the doctor. The old man winked at us and walked out. He was so happy. It was one of the days that told me I couldn't do that job. Edit. I've had quite a few people ask what I do now. How did I got into it? I edit a medical journal. I might do an AML or something. Had a guy come in complaining of a cough and difficulty swallowing. He thought he had tonsillitis and just wanted some antibiotics. I noticed his voice was incredibly hoarse but there were no swollen tonsils, so sent him for a chest x-ray. Huge, baseball-sized tumors all throughout his lungs. One of them was pressing on the recurrent laryngeal nerve, causing his speaking and swallowing problems. He died within a week. My best friend's sister went to the hospital for what she thought was lingering flu. She walked out with a diagnosis of bowel, stomach and liver cancer and died 9 months later. I went into the ER at 18 with severe lower right abdominal pain. Figured I was having appendicitis. Nope. Cancer. It's scary how long it can stay dormant without you realizing it's there. Sorry for your friend's loss. A co-worker of mine was hit by the boss car. Turned out she had rabies. Practically saved her life. A year or two ago here in Texas, a woman went to her optometrist for a regular exam. She later told the news after a long silence. He asks, "Did you drive here?" "No." "The person who drove you here needs to drive you to hospital immediately." "Why?" "Because you're about to have a stroke." Not a doctor, but I was in a fender bender car accident. I was at fault, and my lower back would not stop aching. I went into the ER figuring I had sprained the muscles in my back and that I would be prescribed muscle relaxers and maybe some pain pills. 6 hours. Several x-rays. A CAT scan, and 4 doctors later, I found out my spine was broken and, get this, healed. The best theory any of them could come up with was that my spine had broken during birth, and since we never knew, it just healed itself, filling in with cartilage. One of the docs told me that had we known my spine broke at birth, I would have likely never walked and would have been treated as handicapped my whole life. I didn't find out until I was 20 and already had a child. My mom cried because she always thought I was just a really colicky baby, when in fact I was probably in a lot of pain. Not a doctor, but a couple of years ago my mother had lump in her breast, so she went to get it checked out for breast cancer. Her mum died of breast cancer and her sister has had it twice and has had her breast tissue removed. Fortunately, however, it was just a cyst. But wait, there's more. Turns out hiding behind that cyst was some early stage cancer. Was easy to get rid of and she's fine now. Edit. Typos. For instance, I thought I had food poisoning. Then they emergency took out my appendix at 1 AM. I thought I had a nasty flu strain. Was feeling generally like crap. Didn't go to hospital until 2 days later. Was in operating room less than an hour after that. Appendicitis. Not a doctor. Sorry, I'm gonna be that guy. After I got my appendix out, I went back a week later thinking I was constipated. Nope. I had a giant ass abscess that had started to wall itself off. They went in the drain it and I woke up in ICU 5 days later recovering from sepsis, septic shock and kidney failure. Not a doctor, I'm an EMT. But when I was deployed to Afghanistan as a medic, a medevac pilot came in because he had a small abnormality on his flight physical EKG. Apparently this was something he had been getting waivers for years for. I had just finished an ONT class and learned about something called Brugada syndrome, which is basically an arrhythmia that causes sudden cardiac death in the patient. I jokingly mentioned how his EKG reminded me of the abnormality I saw in my textbook. Thinking there was no way he actually had it and it had to be artifact from the EKG, the doctor's eyes widened and he sprinted out of the office. The pilot had it. Was immediately relieved of flight duty. Sent home and had a defibrillator put into his heart before being medically retired. TLDR, I accidentally diagnosed a man with certain death. Edit. Holy cow, this really blew up. Thanks for the gold. Kind stranger. My sister-in-law thought she had a cyst on her shoulder. Nope. Round cell sarcoma. The doctors said she had 2 months. She lived for 8. When I was 12 I had a crazy bad headache that wouldn't go away. My dad brought me to the doc and I didn't even make it to the exam room before they turned me back and sent us to the hospital. It turns out my headache was from a burst sinus cavity, as in all the bones around my eye broke and the liquid leaked back onto my brain, giving me brain meningitis. My eye was bulging out to the point where I looked like an alien and they told my parents I was not going to make it. Obviously I pulled through but was hospitalized for 2 weeks and missed 2 months of school. I was at the time only the 3rd known case of this happening and they had flown in doctors from all over the US and from the UK. Crazy stuff. I thought it was just the worst headache. Turned out to be so much more. Not a doctor. But, one night, I suddenly had serious stomach pains. After failing to sleep it off, my parents wanted me to stay home from school. But I declined for I had quizzes that day. I sat through US history, algebra II, and even tried to eat lunch. Still in agony. So, after finishing my English quiz, I waddled down to the office and called my mom to get me. At this point, the pain is so bad I can barely stand. So my mom takes me to the doctors. Turns out, my appendix was ready to explode. Paramedic here. We got called out one Christmas for a grandfather who was tired after eating a huge turkey dinner. We get there and the first responders are standing around outside in high spirits. I walk in. Slap a EKG on him. Massive MI, heart attack. Went from happy turkey coma to heart attack in 3 seconds. My mother was in town visiting for Christmas. Suddenly she was slurring her speech, acting belligerent, and all around confused. Tested her blood sugar and all it said was error. We get to the ER and she passed out. Her blood sugar was a 19. Her liver spontaneously failed. The best the doctors can guess is she caught a virus and it attacked her liver. 4 days after the onset she got a liver transplant. A 22-year-old woman in Baton Rouge, Louisiana gave my mother the ultimate gift. Please. Become an organ donor. Please. My mother woke up one day and her arm was numb. After about 45 minutes it was still pretty numb and she thought she had pinched a nerve in it sleeping. But went to the ER just in case. She had a stroke, which actually was caused by a blood clot, which moved up from her heart and exited a hole in her heart, a congenital defect she was unaware she had. She ended up fine and feeling in her arm came back, but she was incredibly lucky that it did. Not a doctor but a nurse. I was working in postpartum care and I cared for a patient who had come into the hospital in labor with her first child. She ended up requiring a C-section. In the OR, they opened her up and found her belly full of cancerous growths. They immediately paged an oncologist at a neighboring hospital, we were just a women's and children's hospital, to come immediately while she was still open. It wound up being terminal. She wouldn't even have known if she hadn't needed that C-section. Can you imagine going to the hospital to have your first baby and leaving with a diagnosis of terminal cancer? I think about her all the time. Not a doctor. But this did happen to me. I had gallstones for 3 years or so before I finally got my gallbladder ripped out last year. At its worst, I was getting an attack maybe once a month or so. So I figured it couldn't be that bad. I went to the surgeon for my post-op checkup. He told me that my gallbladder was filled with hundreds of stones of varying sizes and that it was precancerous. Apparently, people don't typically get gallbladder cancer until they are in their 80s or 90s. And it is often very serious because people don't catch it right away. I'm in my 20s and like I said, I had been sitting on this problem for 3 years before I finally toughened up enough to get it checked out. Scary sheet man. I worked in an ER fast track when a mother brought her 8-year-old daughter for abnormal discharge. Aside from the age, this is nothing unusual as we see many complaints like this throughout the day. The mother thought nothing of it, maybe she's on her period. The doctor, however, was suspicious from the start. So he ordered a gonorrhea chlamydia test which turned out positive for gonorrhea. Unfortunately, we had to discharge the patient on the initial day due to some tests, such as cultures, taking much longer to result. But the very next day we checked the results and immediately started calling CPS. The mother was not happy, to say the least. This obese, 400 plus lbs, woman came in complaining about her stomach hurting. Turns out there was a dead baby in her vag. It was there for a few months and she had no idea. Edit, it was everywhere. Not just in the vag. MB. One girl was feeling really strange and went to the doctor. She was feeling really weak and had trouble breathing. Turns out she had refeeding syndrome and had cardiac arrest while in the hospital. She was transferred to my treatment center for anorexia. That is where I met her. She tried to start eating on her own after years of restricting. Didn't work out too well. Edit, I was a patient there. When I first came to this thread there was not a lot of response. So I added my experience so OP could get a response. I saw a 55-ish woman at the ER last year. She asks us if she might have something wrong with her breast. During my exam, I couldn't help but notice that her left breast was bumpy, talking like 5 cm mass protruding. The nipple was inverted and leaking blood. Clearly a textbook case of cancer. The woman had a pretty high paying job and seemed pretty smart. And was clearly in denial. Paramedic here. But at the time I was still a student. PT was brought in for back pain. They decided to do a bedside ultrasound because they felt a pulsating mass in her abdomen. She was about one funny movement away from her aorta exploding. My friend's mother was on vacation in Key West and as they were walking down the beach her husband pointed out that the toes on her left foot were all sandy and the other one wasn't. She had been kind of dragging the front of her foot, but only on the one leg. The mom vaguely mentioned that she'd been kind of having a little trouble lifting the front of her foot up, but figured she just strained something from running barefoot on the beach a few days earlier. She went to a doctor to see if she could get some anti-inflammatories. After questions and recommendations to see a specialist, they figured out that she has ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. This was 6 years ago. Now she is totally unable to move, talk, and breathe on her own. All she thought she had was a sprained foot. I work for the fire department and once a month we have to do body recovery, pick up dead bodies. Well, one day we were sent to the local hospital to pick one up. A 48-year-old female. She came in with a stomachache at 7 AM and while they were running tests she died at 11 AM. When I picked her up they hadn't gotten tests back and I never looked back on the autopsy, but it's just crazy how the first time she complained of the stomachache she was dead. One time I was in severe abdominal and lower chest pain. I tried to tough it out but it got bad. Went to the doctor. And I was laying on the table when the DR pushed on my stomach to see how much it hurt. I suddenly belched incredibly loud and for a very long period of time. I thought I was going to pass out from belching. After that I was fine. They decided to give me an EKG. And then they found nothing. I was fine. This threaded needs a non-freak out causing story. This one isn't nearly as scary as the others. And I'm pretty late to the party. But here's my story. I have male pattern baldness. And needed a prescription for some hair growth medication from a dermatologist. The doctor said he would give me a prescription. But first wanted to do a full skin checkup. Which he does for every new patient. I got annoyed by the fact that I had to strip naked in front of this guy just for hair medicine. A few weeks later I get a call. There was melanoma cancer on my back. They caught it early enough that it hadn't spread. That checkup saved my life. I don't work in medical. But a few years ago, I started getting a really bad stomach cramp. I couldn't bring myself to eat or drink anything. And I finally decided to have my mom take me to the hospital. I got in and they decided to take a CT scan of me. Well, being a 6 foot, 15-year-old at about 140 pounds, I had to drink some sort of liquid stuff to basically get my insides to show in the scan. Been a while. Don't remember what exactly it was. Tasted like watered down Sprite. Turns out I had acute appendicitis and they had me in the ER in about an hour. My mother keeps telling me about waking up in the recovery room and being high as a kite. I don't remember a thing. Not a doctor nor did this happen to me. A friend of mine was visiting his girlfriend in the hospital for something minor. While he was there, one of the doctors noticed something strange about a small scratch on his neck. They sat him down, ran some blood work, and discovered he had Hodgkin's lymphoma. He kicked cancers and has been cancer free for several years now.